I was told by a Gary in Mandem Kool-Aid drinker, or an antinatalist for short, that I have gotten a bit of a reputation for making comments that are designed to infuriate people, to make them angry. Now, of course, yeah, that is as maybe, but of course I have to observe in that case that anger is something that you decide to whip up for yourself. My comments don't make you angry. You have an angry response to my comments, but that response originates within yourself for whatever reason. And in my opinion, one of the main reasons why people are getting angry with me is basically that it's very frustrating to observe somebody who refuses to keep the carpet down under which you have brushed your logical inconsistencies, and who keeps on dragging out the rubbish you've brushed under there. Now let's just get to the basics of it. A lot of antinatalists, or some antinatalists anyway, are getting very frustrated with me because they keep presenting to me the Banneter asymmetry argument or arguments based on suffering and so on, and I'm point blank ignoring them. The reason I'm point blank ignoring them is because the whole edifice is built on one very important logical fallacy. And after that, it doesn't matter what other arguments are being brought into the discussion. The basic edifice, the foundation on which it's all built, is rotten, and therefore I'm not entertaining whatever goes up in the attic. Sorry, that's the way I work. And when we look at antinatalism, it suffers from the same logical inconsistency, the same flaws that are inherent in an awful lot of philosophical or religious or whatever other outlooks on life that are based on what I would call the big context switcharoo. And let me explain what that is. So the antinatalist argument is an argument that proposes the elimination of reproduction, the elimination of the creation of new life in order to eliminate suffering from the universe. And the argument goes somewhere along the lines of the antinatalist observes that there is suffering in the universe. They observe that life inherently carries the risk of suffering, that suffering in life is in fact inevitable. They declare that suffering is a bad thing, and therefore they declare that a universe that doesn't consist life would therefore be an improvement on the universe that we live in now that does create life. In other words, take life out of the equation and you take suffering out of the equation, and isn't that objectively a good thing? The big context switcheroo that's happening here is apparent when you start making the argument a little bit more specific. And let's put a name on it. Let's call it Harry. Harry is alive and Harry is suffering. Now the antinatalist argument looks at Harry's suffering, and they observe that in a universe in which there is no life, there would be no suffering, and that's better for Harry. See the problem there. The big context switcheroo happens when we move to this universe that's devoid of life. In a universe that is devoid of life, Harry does not exist. So the fact that there is no suffering doesn't matter. That's the basic bottom line of the whole thing. In a universe in which there is no life, in which there are no entities that would be capable of suffering, the lack of suffering is meaningless, pointless. It doesn't matter to anybody. It certainly doesn't matter to Harry, because in that universe, Harry does not exist. So if we observe that Harry is suffering and we empathize with Harry and we would like to make things better for Harry, then we have to concentrate on making things better for Harry. Not removing Harry from the equation, because that switches the context into a new context in which it all doesn't matter anymore. A similar argument on the complete opposite end of the scale is presented by somebody who is pro-life, for example, and who is anti-abortion. And in the heat of the argument, the pro-lifer points at James, say, James, how would you have liked it if your mother had aborted you? And again, the big context switcheroo has happened when that argument is made. Because in a world in which James's mother had decided to go for an abortion when James had only just been conceived, James doesn't actually exist. In that world, there is a fetus that would, in other circumstances, have grown into James. Certainly. But James, at that point, does not exist. So if this woman decides to have an abortion, then that decision matters to herself probably, no problem, to the people around her, to society, to whoever else decides to stick their nose into that woman's business, certainly. But it doesn't matter to this James character, because in the context in which James's mother has decided to make the decision to go for an abortion, James does not exist. And that is the bottom line when it comes to any argument that is based on that particular type of context switcheroo. Whether it's antinatalism or pro-life or any argument like that, it is based on a basic logical fallacy. I am not entertaining such arguments, therefore. No matter how far down the garden path you try to take me, and then you try to point me at all the, weeds and horrible things that are growing there, that doesn't matter. I'm not going into the garden. I'm not walking down the garden path with you. And I know that's frustrating. I'm sorry for it, but that's not going to change the way I'm going to deal with fallacious logical arguments, like, for example, antinatalism.